Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Techsperts presented by Buchanan Technologies. In this edition, we are joined by Tyler Hayes, Support Center Director at Buchanan Technologies, as he explains how adopting a multi-channel support strategy can improve your end-user experience. During this video, he will also highlight the various methods of end-user support and provide some key considerations. Just a quick note, we have provided some relevant links and encourage you to take a look at those to supplement the information presented today. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the video.
Great. So before we really get going, I want to take a minute or two to just talk about some fundamental baselines and some of the factors that really drive the decisions we make. So when we look at that as an IT service provider, whether that be an MSP or an in-house team, and really anyone in the service industry, there's a fundamental responsibility towards end user satisfaction. This goes by a lot of different names. Depending on the survey that's in place, it may be referred to as the Net Promoter Score or NPS score. It also very, very commonly referred to as CSAT or customer satisfaction. And sort of the overarching strategy there would be the Customer Satisfaction Index or the CSI. And that's really the more of the overall approach to measuring and managing your customer satisfaction. Like I mentioned, it can be measured in many ways. Most common now is a survey, whether that's at the end of a chat interaction or via an email or sometimes right on a website with as little as one question, or in some cases it can be a fairly in-depth survey depending on the service that you received and what kind of information is being collected. Those surveys and those results really come back to a business and allow the business to assess how their end users or their customers feel about the service that they're providing. And as I mentioned, that's a fundamental responsibility of anyone in the service industry. So when a business takes a look back and they're looking at those results, again, whether it be many questions or a single question, often the analysis that has to occur starts to break down why something was scored the way it was and what can we do to change it. What's working that we want to build on and that we want to continue, and where are some of the opportunities so that we really can drive those results? Because again, I can't say it enough, it's all about that end user satisfaction and how the end user feels about the service. So during that assessment or in those surveys, there may be questions along the lines of, was the service and the analyst or the representative polite and professional in their communication? Did they take ownership of the issue and really see things through to the end? Were they knowledgeable and resolved the issue? Another really common one might be around the timeliness or the speed to resolution, depending on the industry and what your expectations are. And then there's often a question that may not always get asked, but I think it's an important one that a business asks themselves about these results, which is, were we easy to do business with? So if we take a look at that one a little bit deeper and really try to jump into the end user's feelings of, were we easy to do business with, we have to start to look at certain aspects. One might be, are the processes and policies that are in place aimed to really drive the end user experience, or are they aimed at simplifying things for the technician or the support resources? Those can really be competing interests. And in the focus of end user satisfaction, we really may want to assess that. For a little bit further down the list, do we have the right digital strategy? Do we have the right tools? And do we have the right availability of self-service functionality for those end users to really maximize what they're able to do on their own without even reaching out? Many users today feel empowered and feel more than competent to resolve some of their own issues if they're given the ability to do so. And really to delve off that a little bit deeper, and where I want to spend some time talking today is, when we look at the contact us methods, and further to that, the strategies that are in place around that contact, are they efficient and effective, and do they speak to the most positive end user experience? Again, when we look at that, there's multiple channels that we can do. They all have a purpose. They all have a specific, whether it's a job function, and we see that sometimes where we may be supporting users in a manufacturing facility. The ability to communicate with support may be different for those users or those employees than, say, compared to the student at a higher ed institution. Further down, when we look at some user personas, there can be a difference between a VIP user or a C-level executive and an on-site technician, or again, somebody that is working in an accounting department. It doesn't necessarily mean that the reasons they're asking for support are much different. However, the pace that they work at or what the expectations are certainly can vary. So, as we look at that, the organizational culture, the job function, the personas, the urgency of the issue is a huge one. And then I think probably overarching all of those, especially as we're talking about end user experience, is the person's preference. I think that that one today, where we're now at a time where there's multiple generations in the workforce. There is, if you look at students in an educational facility, or if you stretch into the consumer space where the audience may be much younger or much different, there's a vast difference in how a student just out of high school and attending their first year of college may look for support, as opposed to somebody who's been in the workforce for 50 years and is maybe not been born into technology and has really been adopting it along the way. Those personal preferences, I think, become huge when we start to look at that end user experience and how the channels impact it. So we're going to spend some time looking at a few of the most common ones, and maybe one or two that are a little less common or a little bit harder to implement. However, they're all important. There's a place for them all. And even outside of, we'll focus on these 5 or 6 items. Past this, I mean, we won't even begin to touch on some of the things like, say, social media and some of the channels that are out there, especially in the consumer space. We're going to focus more on a business to business environment. But again, a lot of the same principles come into play there. It's just the channels start to change up when you're looking at things like Twitter or WhatsApp or Facebook, as opposed to email or a phone call. So probably the one that everyone is most familiar with, that may be the most common, is voice service. I do think that this one is, we're seeing an industry trend where there is less reliance on voice service. We're starting to see some thought leaders come up with strategies that actually deprioritize voice service because there's just different, maybe more effective or efficient ways. But voice service will always have a place. It's used in the scenarios where you need that urgent response. Maybe there's a technology outage and you're not able to rely on a different channel like email or a web chat or a self-service form. You really just need to get in touch with somebody to report that outage, or you're having a problem that you need fixed. When we kind of dial back to that piece around the different generational users, not necessarily generationally driven, but just from a technological perspective, often voice may be the most comfortable channel, at least virtually or remotely, for people who feel a little less comfortable with technology. They're able to phone in and be guided through things in a way that suits their style. And there's great complements to the voice service with some of the remote access tools where a technician or a representative can actually access remotely and jump right in and start to resolve issues and see what the end user is seeing. And again, that all kind of pulls it back together as being a very comfortable service. But most commonly, it's around the urgency. Next, if we look at email, again, this one very common. Usually it's lower urgency issues. It's things that maybe we want to work on in between, job tasks or throughout the day, or we may send it for something a request that's going to happen 3 weeks from now, and we just want to start the process and begin that planning. The biggest key with email, you're able to include a lot of information, a lot of detail, and you're able to control that schedule of how you're communicating. You can do it, as you have a slower point in your day. In some cases, it could even be in the early morning or after hours, depending on your job and what you're trying to do, or it could also be outside of your job. And students are learning from everywhere and really at any time now. So email becomes a way that suits that schedule. It's a great method, and we see it used very heavily in business environments. Probably the one that's disrupting things the most right now is chat or SMS based support. It has a lot of that same the same impact of a phone call as it relates to real-time support. However, a conversation through text allows for some pause. You don't have to be as tuned into the conversation. You can take a quick break, focus on something else, and come back to it. And that goes both ways. That's both with the customer and the support agent at the other end of the line. So, you're able to focus on multitasking. We see chat a lot. Again, to use the higher ed place, students who may be in a lecture or in a classroom, they can't pick up the phone and make a call, but maybe they're having problems accessing their virtual learning environment, and they still need support. So they're able to chat in, get that help, and continue on with their class with the least amount of impact. This one certainly does start to lean into a generational preference. Heavily adopted through Gen X and then into the millennial and beyond. People that were early adopters in technology or born into technology, it's just how they grew up through their youth, often communicating with friends through SMS or chat. It's just been, similar to other generations where that might have been a phone call. Now it's often text-based. As a business, there's huge upside from a chat and SMS functionality. And this is where you could tie out into something like a Twitter, a WhatsApp, or some of those text-based communication methods. They're much easier and more commonly tied in to artificial intelligence or AI. So more directly, you think about chatbots and the ability of some of these bots now where you don't even know that you're not talking to a person if it's not identified as a virtual assistant or as some sort of artificial intelligence, which from a business perspective can be awesome. We're able to resolve issues without tying up human resources. We're able to resolve things around the clock, and it ties in really well. AI works really well with automation, so some of those tasks and our path to resolution becomes really clear and easy. So chat and SMS, we're starting to see this with some companies, some organizations, both in the consumer and business world, where this is becoming the preferred method, and in some cases the only direct contact method to get in touch with your service or your support providers. As a spin-off on that, there's also a lot of self-help resources. These do require some investment on behalf of an organization, both in the tool set that you invest in, as well as the manpower to create and maintain. But when we start to look at knowledge bases or self-help topics, whether that be a wiki or a more formal knowledge base with a search function, users are able on their time to go in, pull up resources, and try to resolve their own issues. Again, with users who have been maybe early adopters in technology or born into technology, this is very commonplace for them. They're used to having to maybe look on a website first as the first point of resolution if they have a personal challenge that they're working through. So very, very common there. Once it's built out, it does definitely become the lowest cost solution as you build it once and then it's leveraged by many people in many ways and at many times. So that cost is depreciated over all those interactions quickly. And it really ties back in when we look at in the IT space, if we think about the service catalog and some of the request forms, whether that's procurement based or access based, maybe an onboarding or an offboarding. Some of these are very routine tasks that have a very streamlined set of questions that can be as simple as a form within a tool that collects all the information. The right tool set often will have logic built in so that you're able to identify different geographies or roles or functions and trigger the form as you go through that. But that self-help and the ability to automate those requests becomes huge. Again, it removes the middleman, and often it goes right from the requester to the approver to the fulfiller without having to have anyone triage and move that along the way. So again, the right tool set here and the right partner or the right resource to manage it becomes key. Now we start to look at, walk-up support. This is still used a lot of larger workplaces, whether that be an office campus or an educational campus. Often there'll still be some form of walk-up support. Not necessarily referring to, hey, that's the IT guy over there and we should just walk up and knock on his door and ask for help, although we all know that does happen. But really, when there's an established walk-up method for somebody to come up, maybe they need hands-on support with their device, they may just prefer that in-person communication, whether it's because it's their preference, there may be a limiting factor in their access or the technology use, whatever that may be, they may just prefer it. And often we'll see it with users who may have limited access to communication channels. So again, to consider an environment where maybe we're talking about a manufacturing facility, there may not be a lot of kiosks on the floor for them to attempt a self-service or a web chat or even pick up a phone. For them, it may be much easier to walk next door to the walk-up support and ask about the issue that they're having. So we definitely still see that, and really that one often ties into the size of the organization and what that organizational culture and purpose is. The last one to touch on today, and this one is really emerging. I think it's still a few years from being acknowledged as a real primary channel. We do see it more in the consumer or personal side of life when we look at things like Reddit or Uber that are disrupting some of these industries, but it's that peer-to-peer support. From our perspective in an IT or a professional service industry, you definitely want to make sure that that's moderated by an authority. So maybe rather than having resources answering phone calls or chats, you have resources monitoring and managing forums or public access points. Things like Slack channels or Teams channels are great examples where peers are going to ask questions. And when we consider that over the last 12 to 18 months, the world's changed drastically. We're no longer able to necessarily ask the person that's sitting beside us. So we're virtually asking our peers what their opinions or if they've ever seen or experienced this issue. And we're getting that quick result. It can be the most collaborative and fast-paced place to find those answers. And it also follows a lot of those same KCS or knowledge-centered support principles that we use when we're doing things like developing the knowledge base or maintaining the knowledge base for a self-serve. It documents proven resolutions, so they're there as reference in the future where you may not necessarily even have to ask the question. You can actually just read up in the channel and see or search the channel and see when somebody else had that same question and how they addressed it and how they handled it. So again, this one I think is a few years away from being really acknowledged as a proven channel, but I do think that it's on the horizon. And I like to give the example of the GameStop stock frenzy that kind of went on throughout early 2021, where the influencers and the community of Reddit and that peer-to-peer support totally disrupted the financial industry just based on their communication and their ability to promote an idea and promote it as a solution. So when we look at that, I think it's inevitable that it's going to come into play more and more. And as we embrace and adopt it, I think organizations that get there first will be set up well. So now if we step back from what some of those channels are and we start to think about an organization, we need to develop a strategy that looks at all those channels. And again, there are some others out there that you may want to consider based on your needs. But looking at those channels, how do they fit into what your communication strategy is? And how do we get the most benefit from them? So personally, I think when it comes to something like influencing the customer experience or the end user experience, the biggest thing that we can do is let the users decide. We want to give them the options. We want to educate them on what the benefits of each may be or when it's appropriate to use one versus the other. But at the end of the day, we want to just make sure that they are empowered with those options and that we adapt to their choices rather than try to force our choices out to them. Next, it's important that we invest in the tools and partnerships that empower this communication and collaboration. This won't happen by accident. You really need to take a step back, look at it, and make sure that you're investing in the right areas. And then finally, when you are, whether this is a time investment or a monetary investment, when you're making these investments, you're making these changes, you really have to take a step back and ask yourself along the way, are the things we're doing making it easier to do business with us? Because at the end of what we're trying to do here is answer that question in a way that promotes a more positive end user experience, because we all know that if it's hard to do business with someone, we're more likely to not do business with them. And that's really not the goal here. We want to make sure that everyone has the most positive experience, starting with that contact method. So if we look at how a company like Buchanan Technologies as a managed service provider can help, we offer robust end user communication platforms that utilize best-in-class partnerships. We have the best of the technology world at our disposal, and we're able to bring it into your environment. We have partnerships and development around automation and AI to help streamline some of those tasks and introduce that technology to you in ways that you may not be able to do it on your own, or you may not want to do it on your own. It can be a large undertaking. We have adaptable service levels across all channels. So, we literally will put our money where our mouth is when it comes to delivering these services. And that becomes an important piece. As a company, we're forward thinking. We want to introduce solutions that drive your end user experience, but that are ultimately customized to your business, not ours. And as I touched on early on, it's important to find a partner that has a strong base in that understanding of the customer satisfaction index or the customer experience platform. So Buchanan Technologies ultimately is going to offer a fully managed customer experience program that's not only going to measure the satisfaction, but it's going to address and improve it in partnership with you, whether that be issues that we're looking at internally with our services, or where we can provide some thought leadership to you and help you improve your business.
All right. Thank you so much, Tyler. So we hope the information presented in this video was helpful for you. If you have a question about any of the support methods Tyler covered, or you need assistance with your business's digital support strategy, please feel free to reach out. If you have a more general question about Buchanan and our services, please send an email to solutions@buchanan.com and a representative will be in touch shortly. Again, we want to thank you for tuning in to Ask the Techsperts, and we look forward to hearing from you.